Greetings everyone, Banditex here for the second Sonic-tember 2023 video. Today's subject is spin-offs featuring Sonic's friends, Tails and Knuckles. Yeah, long before Sonic's friends became useless in the video games, Sega actually tried to get some use out of these side characters. This made sense, as both Knuckles and Tails were about as capable as Sonic himself, sharing a similar moveset and being able to run at similar speeds to him. You know, Tails used to be my favorite Sonic character, but an entire decade of bad writing in the video games killed my interest for the guy, especially in Sonic Forces, where Tails seemed to rely too heavily on Sonic's existence to be functional. But enough of that. Let's start with Tails' games and see if giving these two a critical look will redeem my respect for the character. And yes, I said two. Tails got two games relatively close to each other on the Game Gear: Tails Skypatrol and Tails Adventure. Let's start with Skypatrol. Developed by JSH, this game was originally made for a different handheld game console that was never released. The console was intended to be a monochrome and educational handheld similar to the Game Boy, minus the educational part. The system was cancelled, but JSH was contracted by Sega to port this game to the Game Gear, as the specs of the cancelled educational console were similar to the Game Gear. It's believed that the original version of this game was supposed to be a Disney game of some sort, likely one starring Mickey Mouse, since early screenshots show Tails going up against Pete, a character featured in several Disney cartoons and a common enemy of the mouse. The game was reworked into a Sonic title and was only released in Japan at the time, with ports coming to the US being featured in games like Sonic Mega Collection Plus and Sonic Adventure DX. Did Sky Patrol stay in Japan for a reason? Let's find out. The thrilling plot of this game is that Tails has decided to split away from Sonic for a bit in order to find an adventure of his own. He does this and sees an evil witch named Wendy Witchcart doing some damage, along with a few cronies that she's hired. And that's really all there is to it. Honestly, the new villains are pretty boring. Caratia the Rabbit is notable for being one of the only female animal antagonists from the games, but Wendy Witchcart is just a witch, Berenger is just a bear, and Hawkwolf is just a wolf. Apart from both the Archie and IDW comics, these guys never show up again, and even in Archie they got a full-on modern-esque makeover. I won't comment much further as my Archie knowledge is very small, and I'd rather get to the game. Tails Sky Patrol is unique in that it is a 2D rail shooter. Yeah, instead of being a fast-paced platformer with slopes and springs, you just have Tails constantly flying around. His weapon of choice is a ring that he uses like a boomerang. Tails can only throw it once and cannot attack with it until it returns to his hand. The ring can also latch onto various objects like minecarts and balloons to temporarily remove control from him. These can be just as useful as they can be a hindrance, and part of the game is knowing when to use these and when to let them go. Tails is incredibly durable, yet frail at the same time. You see, getting hit by an enemy or projectile will knock Tails out of the sky, but it won't kill him. What will are the walls and floors. For some reason, Tails cannot even lightly graze these. One tap and he's as done as Black Steak. This mechanic is likely a remnant of the game's original identity, but I find it really annoying that Tails just dies here. What I would have preferred is having the energy meter drain more when getting hit by anything and having death occur once it's empty. Yeah, Tails has an energy meter, which can be refilled by eating mint candy, which is Tails' favorite food for those fellow Sonic nerds out there. As for getting hit normally, Tails will lose control for a bit and drop, but he will regain composure if the player mashes the face buttons. So, how are the levels in this game? Not great in my opinion. You get 5 levels in total, and while they are somewhat meaty, they just aren't that fun to fly through. Because this is a Game Gear title, you cannot see very well, which means that it is really easy to crash into something and lose a life. This issue is made worse by how some spots will lead you directly into a trap of some sort. Tails is also always moving to the right. You can slow him down by holding left on the D-pad, but it only helps so much, and there are a few spots you just can't get out of. Like right here, I accidentally got stuck in this little box, and now I have to wait for my invincibility to wear off so I can die and respawn. The most annoying bits of the levels, by far, are these spots where these rocks, I think that's what they're supposed to be, just pop up in a set formation. Destroying these can be really tedious since you're most likely to only strike one at a time. Touching them will kill you, and sometimes they just dump tons in front of you, which means you have to slow down and break each one, which will drain your flight meter. What makes the levels more obnoxious is the fact that you just can't find what you need. On this last level, for instance, I just wasn't seeing any bell checkpoints on my routes. And since I couldn't find much candy, I had to redo certain large stretches multiple times. The game does have things like invincibility power-ups, some lives to scoop up, and unlimited continues, but getting through the game can still be really irritating sometimes since you don't have a lot of room on this cramped screen to see incoming obstacles. Each stage, with the exception of the first level, is capped off with a boss fight, and these aren't good either. Each boss just stops when you hit them, and because these guys do touch damage, it means you have to wait a bit before you can hit them some more. I did notice that you can throw them around and even use their projectiles against them, which is neat and all, but I still find all of the bosses boring. All 4 fights play out in a similar fashion, so while some may have unique projectiles, the bosses all still play out the same way. The graphics are at least nice, but a lot of assets are pulled right from Sonic 2 on the Genesis, as if this game takes place on West Side Island. I guess it's kind of neat seeing these on the Game Gear. I mean, 8-bit Sonic 2 didn't share any levels with the Genesis version, but the theming can clash at times. Like, why is this dark castle level in Casino Night? Why does Wendy have badnik-looking enemies? Because this wasn't supposed to be a Sonic game, remember? I guess that's also why the music is so bland. I mean, it isn't hurting my ears, but I expect better from this series, even on the Game Gear. This console gave us Bridge Zone, Green Hills Zone, Sunset Park Act 3. This is why I expect better from these games. That's really all I have to say about this game. It's just not a great Sonic game, or Tails game you prefer. The entire thing took me 38 minutes to do, and that's due to the somewhat cheap and unfair game design. I can't really recommend you sink some time into this one, as it's just not really worth it if you ask me. Definitely don't go out of your way to buy a Game Gear just to import this. I'm giving Tails Skypatrol a 3.5 out of 10. Yeah, I can see why Japan kept this one for so long. Even if this game was better, you'd still have a half-hour long game on your hands. And while there is some appeal in a short game, 30 minutes, really? Well, that game sucked. Maybe the next one will be better. Tails Adventure. Aspect are back for this one, and maybe they will surprise me with a really good Game Gear game this time. I mean, Triple Trouble came pretty close, and apart from that, they have a lengthy resume when it comes to Sonic games, so maybe this will be their magnum opus. I mean, you can only miss the ball so many times, right? Right? Tails Adventure is either another Sonic game where Tails chooses to take a break from Sonic, or the prequel to Sonic 2, where Tails hasn't met Sonic yet. Either way, Sonic isn't here, Tails is kicking back and relaxing on Coco Island, not West Side, and an army of evil birds are trying to take over this island that Tails is crashing at. With this happening, Tails decides to take action and save the island. The first detail I mentioned depends on the American or Japanese manuals, with the Japanese one implying that this game is a prequel. So personally, that's the one I choose when thinking of the Sonic canon at large, but that part doesn't really matter. Tails Adventure is another Sonic platformer, but it's very different from anything before and after. That's right, we have another unique game to tackle today. Tails Adventure is instead closer to a Metroidvania type of game. As I'm not a huge Metroidvania guy, I'll do my best to explain how these work. Your goal is to make your way to a certain designated spot on the map. Along the way, the player will collect various items that will give them new abilities or increase their strength. In the case of this game, Tails must make his way to the base of the Cuckoo Army, but in order to do so, he must traverse through Coco Island and collect new tools to aid him. Forget about how Tails functioned in any game prior, as Tails does not play like his past Game Gear or even Genesis counterparts. Tails will not curl up into a ball when jumping, rolling doesn't exist, and the spin dash is also gone. Tails instead has a very basic jump, so vanilla that it can't damage enemies at all. Tails instead relies on bombs to do damage in this game. An interesting move to give this child explosives, but these work fairly well all things considered. You can only throw one at a time, but the arc and range are fine, and you have an infinite supply of them. What I'm saying is that they do the job well enough. Tails also can fly like before. It works just like in Chaos and Triple in that you hold up and press jump to fly. But now you can actually jump normally and then fly by jumping again, and it feels really good. You also have an on-screen flight meter to let you know how long you can fly for. The health system has also seen a major change. Tails starts the game off with 10 rings, and will lose a certain amount depending on what hits him. The rings now work as a regular health system, meaning you cannot recollect rings when taking a hit, and rings themselves are a little more uncommon this time around. The last notable change made to how Tails plays is his speed. The two-tailed fox is much slower than usual in this game. He doesn't even run, instead choosing to do this jolly strut. You would think that with the many changes made that this game would suck, but here's why Tails has been nerfed so much in this game. You see, Tails needs to explore to obtain the many items scattered all over the island in order to power up. The main ones you'll find are tools that Tails can use whenever the player chooses. These range from bombs, a little robot that Tails can use to reach areas he can't, and more. Tails can only carry 4 items with him at a time, and this is probably the most annoying part of this whole game. Part of the game is knowing which items you need in order to progress, and which ones to leave behind. Some obstacles can only be destroyed by certain types of bombs, and while some like the napalm and triple bomb are great at both defensive options and for clearing certain roadblocks, others like the large bomb are useless outside of the ladder, and other items are just useless overall. For instance, you have the Knuckles item, which lets Tails punch. But why would you use this when you start the game off with the bomb, which, as established earlier, is a ranged weapon that you can't run out of? Tails has an item that allows him to run, which would be helpful, but you may swap out the robot item for them, enter the stage, only to discover that you cannot progress because you no longer have the robot needed to move on. In fact, never get rid of the robot. Next to the bombs, you absolutely need this thing to do so much for you. This whole item management thing is just awful. Why do we need to go back to Tails' house to swap items? This would have been so much better if we had the ability to carry every item at once. The best item in this game is probably the Sonic item. This allows Tails to perform a spin dash. It works anywhere, it kills enemies, breaks rocks, and it even has rolling physics. This item is so much fun to use, but I think it is the perfect reason why Tails can't do this normally. But that only covers standard gameplay. There are also segments in this game where Tails can go underwater, and unlike your typical Sonic game where you have to slowly wade through deep water taking in air bubbles, Tails gets the submarine from Triple Trouble. This thing is neat and all, but the sub also has its own set of items. Thankfully there's only 8 of them, and managing them is nowhere near as bad since you aren't in the sub as often. Some of these are pretty overpowered though, like the Spark, which is a screen nuke, and the extra armor, which makes Tails invincible. There are also some parts of this game where the sub is used in different ways, such as going up a river in Lake Crystal. I said Lake Crystal, not Crystal Lake. That wasn't even funny. Anyway. The river requires this boost item, but it also affects your jump height even when you aren't moving? What's even more strange is the fact that your jump height is based on how far in the sound effect is. So to get the best jumps, you have to jump just before the sound ends. This whole river section is just weird. Speaking of weird, towards the end of the game, you need to equip the rocket booter item in order to get your sub to fly. And at this point, the sub gameplay turns into a rail shooter like Tails Skypatrol. Only now you don't die from touching the walls, you can turn around, and I actually like playing this brief portion of the game. The final set of items I haven't covered are the Chaos Emeralds. Once again, there are only 6 of them, but these are just sitting around in the levels, and are collectible without jumping through any hoops. Each emerald slightly increases Tails' flight duration, as well as his ring capacity. The ending is also completely unaffected by the emeralds in this game, so don't worry about missing them. In fact, you aren't really rewarded for collecting all of the items in this game. The credits will show you your item percentage overall, but that's it. Nothing happens if you finish with 100%. Speaking of finishing, and because segues are hard, Tails' adventure is quite lengthy. Thankfully, there is a password system. This can be seen at any time in Tails' house, and while it is somewhat big, I'm just glad that some form of saving exists. One more thing I need to mention relating to passwords is that Tails only has 1 life. Upon dying, you're kicked back to the title screen and have to start the game from scratch, unless you select continue. I do think this is kind of dumb, but the game does seem to default to continue whenever you hit this screen, so you should be fine and not have to worry about your progress. The challenge is pretty average in my opinion. Because Tails' Adventure is a much slower game than the others, the whole small screen problem the Game Gear games have been guilty of is pretty much gone now. You're also supposed to take your time with everything, as blindly rushing through everything seems to just lead to you losing tons of health. I will admit that navigating through the game can be a bit confusing sometimes, since some of the rocks look like other rocks and yet some can only be broken by certain items. But I think as long as you try to thoroughly comb through each area and experiment with certain bombs on certain hollow walls, you should be able to figure this game out. The emeralds certainly play a big part in making this game easier, especially since once you have them all, it will give you 99 units of health. and most things only remove 1 bit of health anyway. I think this is why lives are just gone now. You won't really die much, if at all. The only real challenge in this game comes from figuring out where to go and what items to bring with you. Once you know, then you're golden. Not even the bosses put up much of a fight in this game. Granted, Sonic has never really had tough bosses, but these are far more mindless than usual. All you gotta do is chuck bombs until they drop. Some of these guys are even mini puzzles, like this guy here, where Tails needs to use the robot to drop a rock on his head and that's it. He's just dead, I guess. Hopping over to the visuals and sounds, I do like the graphics in Tails Adventure. Aspect have certainly come a long way since Sonic 2 in their visuals, and I think that these are very solid Tails sprites. The biggest gripe I have with the presentation is the performance, since this game tends to chug often, sometimes over dumb things like shooting projectiles underwater. The music is also bland yet again, but I think that they were proud of their work, since you have a rado item that plays any song wherever you are, which would be fine, but this wastes an item slot anyway, so why bother? Tails Adventure is such a unique Sonic game that I think it's worth a playthrough for the novelty alone. It's a Sonic Metroidvania starring Tails, and the game also makes good use of Tails' abilities. The game just has one massive ball and chain weighing it down, the item management system. It is such a pain in the ass getting deep into a level, only to realize that you have the wrong item and have to go back out just to swap something out. Because of this and the other problems holding this game back, I have to give Tails Adventure a mediocre rating of a 6 out of 10. I'm sorry to those that like this game. I do think there is a very solid foundation here, but damn. What we have here is a bit rough. I do think Sega should revisit this idea someday. I'm not sure how Sonic fans would react to a spiritual Tails Adventure sequel, but I know that I would give it a chance. Speaking of chances, I'm curious as to how Metroidvania fans feel about Tails Adventure. Let me know in the comments, I'd like to know what you think. What I will say is that this is Aspect's second best Sonic game, losing to Triple Trouble by just a hair. That game is simply closer to what I look for in a Sonic game. But Tails Adventure is still an alright spin-off at the end of the day. I'm finally done covering Aspect Sonic titles released on main consoles. There are a few more games like Game World for the Sega Pico, but I'm not doing educational content, so I will say that I am done with these guys. Their work as a whole has been average. Some of their games have had fun ideas, and they certainly tried, but none of these games that they've made have been very good, at least to me. So long, Aspect. Thanks for the mediocre line of 8-bit games. Okay, one more game to knock out. Knuckles Chaotix for the Sega 32X. You might be wondering, what exactly is a Sega 32X? Well, it's a Sega 32X. But in all seriousness, this was an add-on for the Sega Genesis that allowed the console to play all new 32-bit games instead of the standard 16-bit ones. The 32X could do more detailed sprites, and even had the ability to do 3D models similar to the Super Nintendo's FX chip games. But by the time this add-on launched, consumers wanted nothing to do with the Genesis and wanted something entirely new. As I alluded to in my last video, the Saturn was the better route to take, but due to the problems developers faced when making games on it, the disastrous early launch in the States, which led to several games being rushed or just not hitting the deadline, and because Sony had the balls to make their PlayStation $100 cheaper than the Saturn was dead on arrival in North America. $2.99. I mean, people did buy one. My dad had a Saturn, and I have vague memories of him playing World Series Baseball 2 when I was really young. But from what he told me, he simply had problems finding games for the console back in the day, and based on that knowledge alone, I'm willing to bet stores didn't even want to put Saturn games on their shelves. So the mid-90s were really bad for Sega in general, but that didn't stop them from wanting to make lemons with lemonade, so Sega began working on their own Sonic game for the Sega 32X. This game began life as a Sonic and Tails game known as Sonic Crackers, where both characters were connected with a tether ring. The prototype was abandoned, picked up in-house at Sega, and reworked into a Knuckles game because 1. Knuckles was popular, and 2. To give the 32X a Sonic game, but without Sonic, just in case the general public couldn't pick up a 32X. They probably saw the writing on the wall for the thing anyway. Knuckles Chaotix is only on the 32X. meaning it never got ported to any console ever. No Steam release, it's not on Mega Collection Plus, no. The only way to play this thing without emulating is to buy a Genesis, a 32X, the power adapters for both, and a fucking link cable connecting the two, because simply having its own power cable and living in the Genesis cartridge slot isn't enough. I should also note that the Model 1 and Model 2 consoles each use different cables, so you need to make sure you have the right ones. It also won't work with a Model 3 Genesis. What makes this worse is that sometimes these things just don't work for whatever reason. I had 2 of these 32X consoles and both refused to work with any of my Genesis systems, despite the fact that my Genesis consoles all worked fine on their own. Why wouldn't the 32X work with those specifically? I don't fucking know. They worked with other Genesis systems, just not mine. This thing is just a piece of shit, that's why. I'm sorry for going all AVGN there, but this is genuinely how I feel about the 32X console. And I'm gonna jump ahead a bit. Don't invest in a Sega 32X just to play Knuckles Chaotix. The loose cartridge alone costed me $80 back in the day, and I'd hate to see what they're priced at nowadays. If you want to play Chaotix, just emulate it. But before you do, I want to tell you what I thought of it. You can't see my thumb. What was the point of that? The story is slightly different across both Japan and North America, but both follow the same basic gist. Knuckles is our star, Eggman is our antagonist, Metal Sonic is back, these new Chaos Rings are the main MacGuffins this time instead of the Chaos Emeralds. Go save the day. The only detail that changes is that the main setting is either a mysterious island that rises from the sea shortly after Sonic 3 in the Japanese manual, or just some high-tech carnival island that Knuckles also guards alongside the Master Emerald. Either way, the plot isn't very important, but it is worth noting that this game introduces Espio the Chameleon, Charmy Bee, and Vector the Crocodile, and also brings back Mighty the Armadillo from Sega Sonic the Hedgehog. One last little detail I want to bring up is that Charmy, Vector, and Espio are very different characters from their current counterparts. And this is because Sega decided to reboot these characters in 2004's Sonic Heroes. So while these are the same characters, they also aren't at the same time, if that makes any sense. Knuckles Chaotix, at first glance, is yet another classic Sonic entry. Just about everything you experienced in the mainline Genesis trilogy is present and accounted for. Rings, badniks, springs, monitors, even bonus stages and special stages are back. Because of this, I won't dwell on the main gameplay part for too long. The first big change you're greeted with is the new tether ring mechanic. In this game, you and your partner character are stuck together by this tethering system. You can use your partner as a weapon, a tool to give yourself a boost vertically and horizontally, and you can call them back to you in the event they get stuck somewhere. In this game, you have 5 different characters to choose from: Knuckles, Mighty, Espio, Charmy, and Vector, each one having their own abilities to help them scale large walls, though more on them later. The next big change is the general game structure. Instead of being linear like the other games, Chaotix shakes things up by having the zones, now called attractions, selected with this slot machine looking contraption found in the hub world. You can try to time your press to pick the stage you want, but it's better to just let fate decide for you, if you ask me. The attractions are also now split into a whopping 5 levels now, easily making these the beefiest zones or whatever in the classic Sonic era. That covers the biggest changes made to the gameplay. The other thing I should talk about are the power-ups, because there's much more now. Speed shoes, shields, and invincibility monitors are back. But now as a bonus, we get monitors that make you bigger or smaller, and a combined ring that converts every ring you have into one large ring that can be picked up when you take a hit, which is a neat idea. Some will even alter your characters, with one turning you into your partner, or one that will change your partner. Speaking of partners, to pick one, you have to use the combi capture found in the hub area. You do have some control over the claw, but it doesn't stop until you drop the claw, and the characters on the bottom do swap around.
Yeah, crocodile. Oh yeah, let's go.
To keep things interesting, 2 characters are exclusive to the partner position, Heavy and Bomb. Heavy being, well, heavy, and Bomb exploding when taking a hit, which can damage you. These are basically traps you want to avoid. Let me just say that I did not have much fun playing this one. In fact, I don't think I ever had a blast playing Chaotix. Quite the opposite. To start, this tether BS. It is a unique idea, but it's not really one that needed an entire game dedicated to it. In my opinion, Sonic is at its best when you have full control over your speed and successfully maintaining that flow. Chaotix doesn't quite have that thanks to your partner slowing you down. You can run for a good period of time, sure, but at some point your partner may just halt your movement. To combat this, I just hold my partner for the whole time, since it just allows me to play the game normally. Now in Sonics 2 and 3, Tails would follow Sonic, but I never cared that much because Tails never made Sonic stop running fast. If he couldn't keep up, then too bad, he'll respawn later. In Chaotix, you can't play without a partner. You're forced to use the combi capture before playing a proper level. The only time you get some peace is when your partner dies or when you start the game in the tutorial stage. Because this game was built with the tether gimmick in mind, several Sonic staples have been dialed back considerably. The spin dash is here, but it feels really underpowered now. Loops are also incredibly rare, and now are just near complete circles that just end with you standing on a platform that just breaks below you. These are just my gripes with the core gameplay. Even if these levels were ported over to Sonic 3, they wouldn't be very fun. On top of all the issues I brought up earlier, there's also the level design itself. Very few attractions in Chaotix stand out from one another, and the 5 levels in each don't do enough to differentiate themselves from the others. The levels either drag on or are over pretty quickly, and I find myself getting lost more often than not. I'm not new to Chaotix either. I've played this game many times over the years, and it doesn't get any easier for me. The only two that stand out are Speed Slider because this one puts a greater focus on speed, and Amazing Arena for the stupid gimmick it has. In this one, you need to find a special switch and then finish the level. Finish the level without hitting the switch will just make the game say, do it again, which is really stupid. Like, why are we doing this anyway? I groan every time I have to go here. No joke. One thing this game has going for it are the bonus stages. While we only have one type now, the one we do get is alright. These are found just like Sonic 3's special stages, finding giant rings hidden in the levels. These have your character in free fall collecting rings, points, and powers. Some are exclusive here, these being ones that give you more control over both the combi capture and level selector. I hated these at first, thinking they were useless since you lose 1 ring per second here, but after spending a bit more time here, I discovered that they do more help than harm. And they're optional anyway, so who cares. What also helps is that every character is made to scale large vertical areas. Though admittedly the character balancing is pretty poor. Knuckles is about the same as always, Vector can climb like Knuckles but has an 8-direction air dash instead, Espio can run on walls and ceilings, but Charmy can just spam the 8-direction dash infinitely. Charmy's mid-air dash also doubles as an attack, so Charmy is essentially the easy mode of this game. By far my favorite character in this game is Mighty. Mighty can perform a wall jump, but he has the ability to jump up the same wall quickly, making him better than everyone but Charmy. I should also note that you can swap characters, but the way you do it just sucks. To swap, go left in the hub world. This will take you back to the title screen, then just reload your save and pick the one you want. There's 5 characters that each have unique traits. Did the developers not think that players would want to experiment with each one? What's worse is that if you pick the no save mode, you're screwed, since doing this will erase your progress. So wait, if the bonus stages are found with giant rings, how do the special stages work in this game? Just like Sonic 1, of course. They really liked that idea, didn't they? I'm happy to report that the special stages are really good in this game. In fact, these are the best special stages in the entire series up to this point in my opinion. These are sort of like a hybrid of the ones from 2 and 3. You run down this tube collecting blue spheres. If you fail to collect enough, you'll have to do another lap around the course. As you run, you lose 1 ring per second like the bonus stages, so it's important to pick up any rings you see. Running out of rings or falling off the stage is how you lose. And honestly, that's how it should be. These levels can be hard sometimes, but they're rarely cheap. This is actually the perfect balance between difficult and fun that all of the others have been missing so far. Sonic 3 came close with Blue Sphere, but I never really had fun with that one. It just had the best entry method, and while it got hard, it wasn't super exciting. You have a total of 6 stages to play this time, and while your only reward is an altered ending where Tails and a Sonic with shaved legs appear, the special stages are so much fun that I don't care. I had the most fun playing these, believe it or not. They probably knew how good these special stages were, because you can actually replay them after getting every Chaos Ring, though these are in wireframe and only give you points. I mean, there really wasn't anything else you could have gotten. Every other game just stops having the special stages be playable, and Sonic 3 just gave you 50 rings for each giant ring touched after getting every emerald. but points are worthless in this game, so I'm not sure why you can replay these in the first place. Another thing I like is the amount of rings you enter the special stages with affects the timer too, so it helps make the rings you collect in the main game have more value, since lives are completely gone in this game. I guess since this game is generally much easier than any other Sonic game, they decided to remove lives altogether. Checkpoints are also gone, probably since you'll rarely die in this game. Getting hit without any rings will not kill you, but it will kill your partner for a brief period of time. Getting hit without a partner or rings is how you die. But really, this will almost never happen. The bosses with Eggman don't even put up much of a fight this time around. There's no instant kill hazards like crushing blocks, spikes, and Banditex are rare. No pits, not even any underwater parts. I know some of these components are annoying, but Chaotix to me just comes off as brain dead in its design. At least they put some effort into the presentation. I never hear any love for the soundtrack, which is a shame because it's really good. Speed Slider in particular is my favorite song in this game. The rest in general are also great. While I'd put it below Genesis 3D Blast's OST, it's only by a hair. Both are pretty close in quality. I don't know how this game's music compares to other 32X games, but this is the kind of stuff I want in my Sonic games. The graphics are also really good. The 3D effects, while basic, are really charming, and the sprites are so lively now. Each character has their own personality that shines through and looks great. Though Mighty is literally just Sonic but red. Like they literally traced over his sprites from the Crackers prototype. But I still love what we have. The game even has a day and night system, allowing the game to have just a little more visual variety. It's all good stuff. If you like Knuckles Chaotix, I get it. This game has some redeeming qualities. However, Knuckles Chaotix is one of those games that fails in the most important area of games for me. The gameplay. It's a Sonic game with a gimmick that you'll either love or hate, and because I hate it, this game just isn't for me. But due to the positives being weighed in, I'm giving Knuckles Chaotix a 5 out of 10. It's an okay game, but not really one worth going out of your way to play. This game does at least deserve to be acknowledged by Sega though. It's just baffling how they've managed to never port this thing to anything that mattered over the years. I've heard some say that the 32X isn't easy to emulate, but I call bullshit on that. I've done many playthroughs of Chaotix via emulation, and the worst problem I've ever had was trying to find an NTSC ROM. If the footage I used looked a bit slow, that's because I can only seem to find it PAL ROMs. But then again, I didn't look too hard. I'm sure they're out there. But I wanted to finish this video on time, and my Crash Team Rumble addiction isn't helping production speeds either. But I'm signing off. Let's spin the wheel and look at what's coming up next. Odd ones. Oh boy. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Banditex. I'll catch you in the next one.